squarely now with a contentious relationship between the United States and South Africa. And Trump says he's pulling out his team from preparing for the G20 summit that South Africa is supposed to host. Has this G20 been of any importance to South Africa all this while?
The G20, we can try to reduce it to something else, okay? People can beat about the bush, but G20 eventually says, what facilities can we get better access to in the IMF and the World Bank? So that would be the issue here. And more affordable loans, even forgiveness of loans, and all sorts of things like that. So that is where that game is, the game of the G20. But I want also to talk about something else in this thing that we are raising. The existence of G20,
Ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast, where we discuss everything Africa, everything development, everything policy, everything investment, everything business, with one objective in mind: how to transform Africa. And our motto is, as you know, governance in Africa cannot be by revenge, cannot be by retribution, but should be focused on foresight, strategic planning, strategic orientation, and strategic partnerships. With me in the studio today is a principal consultant at the Center for Strategic Leadership, Mr. Sandile Swana, who understands South Africa. He understands the South African political landscape and also has ideas about the future of South Africa and where we can take and what can take South Africa towards development. Mr. Sandile, you're welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast.
Thank you so much, Brother Galim, and I'm so happy to be on your show.
Thank you so much. Like I told you, I've focused a lot on South Africa over the last few months because I've decided to give a light to Africans so that we learn from the good and the bad. South Africa has been on a trajectory towards development, but recently reports are showing that that trajectory has slowed down, may not even be stagnant, might be regressing into where the rest of Africa is, and we don't want that to happen to South Africa. Because if it happens, our beacon of hope is gone. And you've been very vocal about policies that should move South Africa forward. And we're going to talk about South Africa's leadership in Africa, South Africa in G20, South Africa in BRICS, and then we look at the current economic situation and we proffer solutions for the future. I hope we are going to cover this in good time and in some depth, and viewers would have time to enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. As Africans, we do need to, first of all, in a show such as this one, to acknowledge some of the achievements of Africans and African leaders. Even here in South Africa, we need to be so careful when we criticize, and I'm one of the critics of the leadership here, that we don't become careless in how we handle history. When you look at the economic statistics of South Africa, first of all, by 2008, at the end of 2008, our GDP growth was becoming relatively respectable at just about 5%. And long-term unemployment was declining. So the first period up to 2008 of black government, if you want to call it that, and the ruling ANC was by now close to 70%, was becoming more popular. And I think with good reason. I'm not saying there were no mistakes then. There were mistakes, but the overall net result, measurable result and progress was there. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say about that is that I have said to the leaders here, if you are riding a horse and riding very well and you fall off the horse, sometimes the simple thing to do is just to get back on the horse and ride it the way you were riding it before. Because now people are proposing changes of policies, but it was not the policies that actually changed when we started going down. It was people and practices and lack of discipline that actually kicked in. It was not policies that caused this problem per se.
Thank you so much for that brief and general introduction about South Africa and the context. But I want us to talk about BRICS and South Africa's leadership in Africa. What positions South Africa, what makes South Africa to take this leadership position on the continent? Is it because of South Africa's current economic stance, historical past, or economic or leadership position?
I think there's been a development. It has developed, let's put it like that. So in the early, obviously, a lot of Africans, African leaders felt that Africa as a whole is not completely free until the last tip of Africa is liberated. It was serious. I mean, today we are very relaxed about it, but it was actually hectic. So a lot of African thinkers and African leaders know a lot about South Africa. So then the first phase of how South Africa got into leadership in Africa was about ideas. It was endogenous ideas that were from the African continent. There were at least two of them that I can remember. The first one was the idea of the African Renaissance. And that idea had been discussed by the likes of Sheikh Anta Diop and many others to say Africa actually was great before. We need to rediscover ourselves and start moving forward. So that idea was touching a lot of African thinkers and a lot of they were being revived intellectually by the thoughts, and Mbeki was at the forefront of that. Then he came up with a second idea, which was the NEPAD, which was simply saying that it needs to be a new partnership. Africa needs to stop being a place where we get aid from Western powers and so-called developed countries, but we instead need to redefine that relationship into a relationship where there is investment, there is equitable trade, so we become economic players, not beneficiaries of trade. So those ideas fired up the intelligentsia in Africa as a whole. So it was not so much to say that South Africa has got resources, this, that, and the other. It was the quality of the thinking that was actually coming up, and the African brotherhood and sisterhood across actually felt that this guy is saying what should be said in Africa now, and they wanted to be part of that in a big way.
To think that the African Brotherhood actually saw South Africa as the leader when it is the same African Brotherhood that struggled to liberate South Africa from the apartheid. Does that not show a paradox? You liberate me and then I become your leader?
You must remember that the African Brotherhood did not liberate the Boers who were oppressing us. They liberated Africans that were being oppressed in South Africa. So the very reason why we fought the struggle for freedom was because we knew that there could be something better. This was a fight. I mean, South Africa is a different history if you compare to Nigeria and many other Western African countries, for instance, and other African. This is settler colonialism and a very large foreign population, white population, if you want to call it that had settled here and entrenched militarily in a very big way. So this was not a walk in the park. Nobody was going to just walk in here and claim a victory. It was not going to be like that. And a lot of effort, Cuban forces, military forces came here. All sorts of things happened before that idea that there must be liberation must happen. So we cannot downplay the role of the African countries. A lot of people lived a long time in places like Nigeria, Cameroon, and so on. Miriam Makeba lived in Cameroon, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that. And also, you can look at it from another angle. You must not always think that your youngest brother is more stupid than you if you're the elder brother. It can happen.
He's weaker. He should be weaker than me, not more stupid than me.
So if somebody you think is younger than you comes up with a better idea than what you've been thinking up until now, you've got to accept that this is what it is and take the idea and move with it. So there was a sincerity about that. And there was a lot of work that was being done. I mean, even UNISA at the time, you remember that they were trying to expand into the African continent, into Ethiopia, and so on and so forth. Others were promoting the creation of an African, which is still necessary, an African innovation system. For instance, now when we had COVID, had we been actually very aggressive in promoting the African innovation system, our approach towards the vaccine and the creation and manufacturing of vaccines would probably have been different had we created our own continental innovation system up to that point.
Yeah, I want to stop you there. You're talking about the vaccine and all the rest. Let us move a little bit forward to today and look at the relationship between South Africa, the leader of Africa, and South Africa's representation of Africa in G20 and BRICS. We'll look at the UN security seat later on. Is South Africa actually representing the rest of Africa within these blocks, or is just another co-option of another African country to show representation around the world?
I mean, obviously, the short answer to me is that South Africa has represented Africans there and actually recruited, if you like, we can even call it that, recruited Africans into BRICS, as an example, straight away. The G20 is not necessarily an African platform, which is where I was going with my previous discussion, because I believe that we must have ideas that are our own, or at least if they are not our own, there must be ideas that come from the global south. So the G20, South Africa is there and is representing Africa and the global south in terms of the agenda, to say, guys, there are things that are needed in the global south that may not be presently well discussed or well positioned in the G20. And obviously, it's not easy because South Africa comes after Brazil. So Brazil is secure in knowing that South Africa will continue with whatever initiatives Brazil put in there. After South Africa, it will be Trump. And Trump may not want to sing from the same hymn book as the South Africans. In the BRICS case, there were certain, call them green shoots, that were identified by whether it's McKinsey or whoever identified the concept of BRIC and then later on BRICS, to say, actually, this block of countries is going to be the next area where development and economic growth will come from. And I think in many ways, China has proved exactly that. India has not been as quick off the blocks as all that. Brazil, in certain economic segments, has actually eclipsed the US and many other major economies. South Africa has tottered, has been limping and not doing its job properly. But I want to believe that today, in the agenda of Africa and is represented and active within BRICS and within the G20. And South Africa is at the forefront of that.
Is China going forward because of its original economic plans, or is it going forward because of its membership in G20 and in BRICS?
The plans where China is today, obviously, if you are a developing country, or no matter who you are, over a 50-year period, your ideas become deeper and clearer. From 1976, I think we need to be able to say the fruit that China is enjoying today was started to be planted around 1976. So there are certain things that facilitated, for instance, their joining of the WTO and being a part of the international trading system. But you know, there are many nations that are part of those systems but don't know how to exploit them and how to use them. So we can't say that's the only thing that happened, but I want to believe that China is a nation of long-term planners. They are long-term planners and they have the discipline of implementing their long-term plan. So I would attribute that to their efforts.
So of what importance, therefore, is BRICS to any of these countries? Have you seen BRICS influence the economy of these countries at all?
I think the panic that Trump has created around the world would be greater without BRICS.
Why? how is BRICS being a counterforce to Trump? BRICS was initially supposed to be a counterforce to the global West, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, but now it's becoming a counterforce to Trump instead.
No, it's not like that. There are details there that you need to be careful about. Because when you say the West, and we have to be brutal here in our honesty, when you say the West, the European Union, up until Trump basically told them to go to hell, they were just his little boys and with a big brother who takes care of everything for them. The same with the UK. The whole NATO UK type of axis was actually, so what we called the West was exactly that. And the decision-making power and the leadership always came from the US. So Trump, it's not about Trump as we use Trump, the word Trump, to represent a number of things, to say that Trump is reforming the Western way of thinking and doing things. And there have been problems there. And it's not the first time Nixon did this. And I mean, Nixon moved the whole world out of the gold standard. I mean, that was a hell of a thing that he did. And Trump is trying to do something similar today. Now, the issue is not that you formed BRICS to fight Trump. You may not even have been aware that there's a thing called Trump that might come. But now that it has come, with, for instance, illegal sanctions, what I mean by that, sanctions that are not authorized by the United Nations, unilateralism and all sorts of things like that, then in the meantime, if it starts raining and we are in the veld and there's a big storm, hailstorm, you need to find a rock or some cave to enter into. So BRICS happened to be the nearest cave that people could run into. BRICS offers, with the technological base that they have, they offer an alternative to the cross-border payment system, SWIFT and all that. They offer that. So the USA knows that if we push too hard, these guys could do something. And these guys were not proposing, and they're still not proposing, an abolition of SWIFT or an abolition of the US dollar or any of that. But they want the flexibility. You need to be, as a way of risk management, you need to be in the dollar, you need to be into SWIFT, but not 100% there. So that is what it is. That is what it is, and we cannot deny the numbers. The numbers, for instance, the US is no longer leading international trade. The numbers now are totally favoring the China, right? And Brazil in some categories has done extraordinarily well. I mean, when you talk soya, for instance, I mean, Brazil has really blown the US out of the water. Not to say that we're in the economy to compete with the US, but you have to measure against somebody, and the US has often presented itself that you measure yourself against them.
Yeah, so that is that about BRICS, which I still struggle to find of what importance it has been to South Africa and maybe to Africa as a whole. But then there is a G20 on this other side with a contentious, maybe Trump is going to fit in here squarely now, with a contentious relationship between the United States and South Africa. And Trump says he's pulling out his team from preparing for the G20 summit that South Africa is supposed to host. Has this G20 been of any importance to South Africa all this while?
The G20, we can try to reduce it to something else, okay? People can beat about the bush, but G20 eventually says, what facilities can we get better access to in the IMF and the World Bank? So that would be the issue here. And more affordable loans, even forgiveness of loans, and all sorts of things like that. So that is where that game is, the game of the G20. But I want also to talk about something else in this thing that we are raising. The existence of G20, the existence of BRICS and other multilateral agencies is not by itself a problem for Africa. Just like I said with the WTO. The WTO has existed. China has made a spectacular success of participation in the in the WTO. When you look at it, that around 2011, the GDP per capita of China was smaller than that of South Africa. GDP per capita was smaller. Ours has been going backwards in reverse gear. China has been going forward. So the gap has become bigger and bigger. So you can have access to the same facilities and you don't use them. Then you blame the facilities. So in other words, you can have access to BRICS, you can have access to WTO, you can have access to G20, and you are useless. You don't take advantage of these facilities. Then who is there to blame about that? And I'll make some examples. I'm jumping to another question that we are going to probably ask me later. You know, many years ago, there was a belief, and I was talking to engineers and all sorts of people like this, that our engineers are so welcome in the African continent by Africans. And we had big companies, Transnet, that could actually do railways in Africa. We had ESCOM that could do electricity. We had companies that, state-owned companies that could do dams, plus private sector companies. And we let all that goodwill go to waste. And who took that gap? It was China, right? The gap was available to us as South Africans. And we had the capability, with the money. Some of our companies were cash flush, were sitting with financial. ESCOM in the initial stages, in its electricity for all in South Africa, it was financing that campaign, that expansion of electricity from its own resources. That's how strong it was at that time. And at a certain stage, we just let all that strength dissipate. Now, other people have done better with opportunities that were in front of us that we did not exploit. Now we then say, this is useless for us. But actually, we are useless to BRICS. We are useless to Africa. We as South Africans, we've created that scenario. Let me add to this. Today, there's confusion in South Africa. Today, as we speak, South Africa has a very good brand for universities, including postgraduate studies, including PhD studies, a very good brand. To the extent,
that is why I got my PhD from there.
Yes, to the point that the majority of PhD students now in South Africa is from the other African countries, which means we are now exporting this product. It's a good product. But you can ask yourself a question and you can find the answer. Are we capitalizing on that? Are we really capitalizing?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about this later on when we're talking about South Africa's stricter sense. So I want us to talk about China, BRICS, South Africa within the global world. You've painted a picture of China's integration to the World Trade Organization, G20 and BRICS, and correlating that to the South African situation. My point here is China got into these organizations when China was already stable economically. China got in there to take advantage of those structures. Did South Africa get into these organizations to take advantage of the structures to build on what they already have? Or did South Africa get into these structures rather to let these structures help South Africa build up its own base?
You must remember that, as I said in my earlier presentation, South Africa was traveling very well internationally up until 2008. When Zuma came in and started linking up with BRICS, South Africa, although South Africa was coming out of the 2008 crash, it was not an issue because the crash had affected almost everybody, one way or the other. But South Africa had demonstrated very good numbers. The things that South Africa was doing were admirable. So we did not go to BRICS in an ambulance or in an emergency vehicle. No, that's not how we went to BRICS. When we went in there, we still were well respected. We're still a country that even the black government was respected to know that we can get things done. But what people did not know, and probably even our BRICS partners did not know, was that actually, although we had been on a horse, we're starting to fall off that horse. And then we actually fell off the horse, and then all the things that BRICS could have gotten out of us, because, by the way, you get value into your own country by contributing to the other countries, right? China, for instance, with its Belt and Road and all these things, is contributing to other people, but it actually then improves its own international trade in the process, and so on and so forth. So When you diminish your ability to contribute, you are also diminishing your ability to profit out of the arrangement. So I don't think that when South Africa entered G20, entered all these institutions, it was on a stretcher. No, we were strong when we entered, but we've become rapidly weaker over the past 15 years.
Let us talk about the G20 that South Africa is supposed to host. Is South Africa in the G20 now as that country that went in there with full confidence as a key participant, or is it that country that is representing itself there now as on a stretcher or on an ambulance?
I don't think we can deny that we are weak. We cannot deny that. However, some of the geopolitical issues present opportunities, but I do not know if we'll be able to capitalize on those opportunities. As an example, with the international war on tariffs, what that did, it moved the whole bloc, for instance, the whole EU, to say, South Africa, we're behind you, right? We're behind you in your leadership of the G20, which then means that in the reconfiguration of trade, international trade, South Africa is able to work with certain partners, work with Asia, work with EU, and work with Latin America, right? Canada is still not clear which way Canada is going to go, but you can see Canada has been under a lot of pressure to take a certain stand, and you cannot be a loose ball in this game. You're going to have to plug in somewhere and create that trade. So at a time when South Africa was weak, the change in geopolitical situation brought strong allies on the side of South Africa that potentially we could take advantage of, and there are reasons why we must take advantage, and we are taking advantage, maybe not to the degree that we should. For instance, we need those markets in Europe for a lot of products, some of which we can no longer send to the US as we used to, etc., etc. So it could be an impetus for us to say, you better sober up and regain your strength.
Why don't you fix the situation with the US and continue doing business with the US to ensure stability rather than take to the EU when you're not sure of what is going to happen? Because if you look at it, India has fixed trade relations with the United States already. China is in talks. UK is in talks. They've already signed a deal. The EU is also in talks. So at the end of the day, I wish sure that the EU is going to favor its negotiations with South Africa over the United States?
What people actually may not know is that if you look at Europeans, member state, European member state, EU member states, and you total them up, actually the EU is the number one trading partner already anyway with South Africa. China is number 2, the USA is number 3. So that's the first thing you need to consider.
As trading partner, are you talking about those who import finished goods from South Africa, or those who do all forms of businesses with South Africa?
It's South Africa. You must remember that the products from South Africa, we are not one of those African countries that just sell raw materials. So it's a mixture of goods. So we sell finished goods.
I wanted us to make a difference. Which country imports the most of finished goods from South Africa? Is it the European Union as a bloc, or is it the United States, or is it China?
No, it's the European Union. It's the European Union. European Union, absolutely no question about it.